Over the last few screencasts, you have seen me use the Chrome developer tools quite a bit to debug our React applications. And I want to do a brief video on how we debug React components using the Chrome developer tools. And we're just going to do a brief overview so you can make sure you understand everything that I have been doing in those videos. The important part is that when something is not working in your React component, because it is just plain old JavaScript, you have the ability to use the JavaScript debugging tools inside of Chrome to debug your components. And that's super helpful as long as you use them. The most important tool is this console. Every time you run your React application, you can see if any errors or warnings pop up so long as you have your default levels set and you're getting info warnings and errors. Same thing goes for the ability to console.log. When you console.log, you can see what values are. Now, one thing about console.log, as we've been going through these tutorials, I've been using console.log a lot just so we can see how things execute without really needing to go set debug points. In actual software development, when you are building front ends, you're going to want to avoid console.logs and use them as a last resort when you can't figure something out using the debugging tools. And what I mean by that is that console.logs really shouldn't be happening in your application, because a lot of times developers forget to pull them out or delete them from their source files before everything is compiled and pushed to production. And sometimes you don't really want users, if they know how to open up the web developer tools, really seeing everything console.logged out. And the console.log just adds another thing that the browser has to do when it's running your application. If you have a ton of console.logs throughout your application, it's going to slow your application down at least a fraction of a bit, and the more console.logs, the slower your app's is going to get, especially on low-powered computers like Chromebooks and stuff like that. So make sure you're not using console.logs. The best way to do it is to look at your sources and then go into your source folder and go into components and then pick the component that you want to debug, pick its JavaScript file, and then make sure that you set breakpoints on everything that you want to look at. And if we're looking at like this list component right here, if we actually want to see what happens on our props.todos.map, you can set a breakpoint right here and then refresh your page and it will break on that. And then over here in the right hand pane, you can set watches. So here I've got a watch set for an error. I like to have that just in case there are errors. Another one that you might want to add is error, like that. Just error is what I want. And so sometimes people use error and some people use just error for error. So you might want to watch for those. So the watch panel is really good because you can set a watch on very specific things instead of trying to dig through the call stack to try to find it. The other thing that's the other panel that's really useful other than the watch where you can manually put stuff is the scope. In the scope window under locals, you can actually see all variables that are local to the context or the scope that you're currently in. And here we are within the scope of this to-do list component. And being that we are in scope, we see the props, and the props we can see that the to-dos are passed in, and then we can explore each to-do within that props to-dos list. We also see this, and we also see the to-do components. And right here, we have nothing in that to-do components because we haven't iterated yet. And if we wanted to see the iteration, we could actually break this down from a one-line fat arrow function to a multi-line fat arrow function, and then actually see what's happening here if we wanted to get in there, if we had errors happening. So make sure that you're using breakpoints effectively, and you can see that because our components are really just pure JavaScript built on top of a pure JavaScript framework called React, we can debug with our regular JavaScript tools, which is really useful. And then start to pull away from using console.logs in your console. And then of course the tools here, if we want to just move on, we can click play. We can step over to go to the next statement. So if we do that, you'll see that we stepped down to the next statement and then it pauses again. Super useful when if you put a breakpoint, nothing's wrong here, then you can step down to the next one and see what happens. And you can see now our to-do components is now full of actual React components that now wrap each of our to-dos. And we can see the keys are now all set. So if we had some error with like a key error, even though we're pretty sure everything has a proper unique key, we could see what's up with that. So let's click play really quick. And let's add a new item to our list. Click submit. Here we can see that our props now has the to-dos has 6 items in it. We can see it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If we click play, everything is good. We don't have any errors in our console. Everything looks good. Now if we add a new one to this and we click submit, and we go ahead and look at our to-dos array, we see that it now has 7 items in it. But since we weren't really handling unique IDs for these, we will see that our 5 has an ID of 6 and our 6 has an ID of 6. And that's why I said handling unique IDs was something we weren't going to get into, but was super important. So now when we click play, we should see in our console we get a key error because we already have one with the key 6. So this is interesting. When you get an error like this or something unexpected, you can debug by clicking submit, look into your to-dos, look at these to-dos that you've got, and see just from a glance that these 3 have the same ID. And that tells you, oops, I forgot to implement unique IDs. I need to build some logic for those unique IDs. And all of this was done without creating console.logs, which you may forget to remove or you will have to go back and remove, which is a lot of extra work when you're building a lot of React or complex React components. So move away from console.log, start using the sources, start using breakpoints, start stepping through the code to find out what's going on. And if we look at our to-do components list, we can see right here that these 3 components, which are the to-do component displays, or these to-do item display components, we can see that they have the same key. And in React, that's not okay. And that's why we're getting these errors down here. So again, make sure you're using the sources and breakpoints and stepping through. Use your call stack, your scope, and also use your watch if you're really interested in a very specific variable within your application like errors. All right, that's how we debug components in React. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, a lot more complexity, but that's where you want to start out with.